Well, this is interesting. Martha McCallum, the Fox News host, actually made, unexpectedly, a correct point about how the Trump campaign has had plenty of time to prepare for the electoral landscape that they're going to be operating on, and thus they can't really cry wolf this time around. Here's what I mean, and then we'll discuss.
Election day now is 2 months away, but early voting starts in 2 days. Woo-hoo. Thousands of Americans getting ready to get their mail-in ballots this month. The campaigns are laser focused on swing state voters, and so too is Martha McCallum, who joins us right now. Hello to you.
Hi there, guys.
So North Carolina's in the chute first, okay?
Yep.
We found in 2020, granted it was a COVID year, okay? We found in our voter analysis 71% of voters cast their ballots before Election Day. Of that 71%, 30 was voting early in person. 41% was voting by mail. Now, COVID year, we'll see whether or not they're that high.
Yeah, I mean, the midterms dropped down to like 57, 58%, but they don't have as high a voter turnout as an election year anyway. But we'll see if that is a marker. It's interesting that there has been a lot of discussion and momentum towards returning to day of voting. You see, in Europe, they went back to it after experimenting with it for quite some time. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see how successful Republicans have been about getting out the early vote. They're not going to be able to cry wolf twice on this. They've had 4 years to figure this out. I asked Corey Lewandowski about it yesterday. He said, absolutely. They have this amazing ground game. And Democrats they'll release, well, we have 31 offices in North Carolina. We have this many offices in Michigan. Republicans don't. And so the question is it because they don't? And we also know that Democrats have these places in full force all the time, throughout, in between the election cycles. They're not gearing up for election cycles. So the big issue, obviously, there were many issues around 2020, but the big one, was around turnout, getting in those mail-in votes. And then we had that situation where votes are coming in late in the day because you have the day of voting being counted in some states first. Then you have the mail-ins. So you're going to see a huge number of mail-in ballots coming in later in the day. And it's something that everybody has to understand and be prepared for. But I just wonder how successful both sides are going to be in getting their folks organized and out early to vote.
So a softly made point that is oppositional to MAGA, but it is, because she's saying last time they pretended like voting by mail was just inherently fraudulent, so those votes in some places get counted after the on the day votes in person, and that was so a big spike in votes for Democrats because Trump was saying don't vote by mail, so it was a lot of Democrats, not his voters, who were voting by mail. That must have been fraudulent. And then early votes, why do we get so many days to vote? It should be just the same day. It just is fraudulent. Not really ever proving that or explaining logically why it would be more likely if you're voting early for it to be fraudulent. But that was the argument. So what she's saying is, listen, they've now had time to prepare. If they still can't get their together, that's on them. They can't cry wolf. She didn't say this, but they can't cry fraud either, baselessly, as they did last time. Last time they couldn't, but this time they really can't, credibly. Because the other thing is the RNC and Donald Trump have been begging for money. Donate, because we're going to stop the election fraud this time around. Laura Trump hiring all these lawyers to be all over the place and poll watchers and all of it, because she's saying a part of why you should have me as a leader of the RNC and you should donate to the RNC is because I care about election integrity. It's based on lies, but if you're saying you're going to secure the election and then still you lie about it and say it was fraudulent, you're even more crazy. But what's interesting is while they try to push conspiracy theories about mysterious influences in our election and fraudulent and wrongful and illegitimate, we got some news, and this is crazy. It's crazy. That will blow your mind. Maybe not. To introduce this to you, let me just say, have you ever thought, gosh, some of these right-wing influencers, they push such blatantly inaccurate talking points often that seem to really align with Russia. Could they be getting money from Russia? And people say, well, that's ridiculous. Just because you disagree with them, don't act like they're paid by Russia. Oops. CBS reports, 2 Russian nationals working for a news network controlled by Vladimir Putin's government funneled millions of dollars to an American media company that paid right-wing influencers for videos pushing narratives favorable to the Kremlin, U.S. prosecutors alleged on Wednesday. What are we talking about? Well, if you're online at all of a sudden, I started hearing about this Tenet Media. A bunch of the right-wing influencers were part of this Tenet Media organization. People we've covered, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, that right-wing guy we've discussed, Dave Rubin. And through a bunch of different entities, essentially, Tenet Media was funded by Russia to push ideas that benefit them. Now, to be clear, all of the influencers alleged in this are saying they didn't know this, and I actually believe them because many of them were doing this sort of stuff long before Tenet Media was created and started paying them. But the scary thing I think they should consider, why is it that what you're saying would be so aligned with the ideological goals of Russia, especially amid their invasion of Ukraine, that they'd be willing to funnel money to you? An indictment unsealed in the Southern District of New York charged these 2 individuals, both based in Moscow, with conspiracy to launder money and conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The indictment came as the Justice Department unveiled sprawling allegations accusing the Russian government of meddling in the 2024 U.S. elections. The 2 defendants worked for RT, a media outlet formerly known as Russia Today that is funded and controlled by the Russian government. Federal prosecutors said RT oversaw a series of covert projects that included funneling $10 million through a series of shell entities to a Tennessee-based company launched in 2023 that publishes videos on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Quote, many of the videos published by U.S. Company 1 contain commentary on events and issues in the United States, such as immigration, inflation, politics. While the views expressed in the videos are not uniform, the subject matter and the content of the videos are often consistent with the government of Russia's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions in order to weaken U.S. opposition to core government of Russia interests, such as its ongoing war in Ukraine. And then think about this. Oh, gosh. Then we'll get to the reaction from these influencers. You know how I say both sides, in a general sense, have blame in stoking the division that we have. And eventually, I'm going to spend more time talking about that and even trying to see where I could do better on that, okay? So I get that it's not just the right wing or MAGA that causes us to be in such a divided, especially online environment, for sure. And what does well on platforms for both sides promotes often provocation, which is why a part of what I would request to many of you is to yourself try to train yourself to consume content in a way that isn't just going to the most provocative thing, right? But I've said before, it's not fair to establish a false equivalency in your arguments and make the argument that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, both the right-wing media ecosystem and the left-wing media ecosystem are equally to blame or are as divisive. And it's interesting here, Russia's interest is in dividing our country. And who do they go to do that? Right-wing media. Knowing that if they can prop up or help to support some of these outlets, they do it better than anyone. And they happen to also push, when it comes to Ukraine, things that are advantageous to Russia, ideas that are wrong about Russia's invasion, but seek to justify it in a way that Russia likes to see. Though the company is not named in the indictment, prosecutors said that it describes itself as a network of heterodox commentators that focus on Western political and culture issues and features 6 commentators as its talent. Tenet Media says, wild. I've had the thought before, what is this Tenet Media thing? Seeing it everywhere. Here it is. Uses the same phrase in its description on its website, and other details in the indictment align with the firm. Its website lists 6 right-wing personalities, including Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson. Now, yes, I am going to do a shameless thing here, but I think it's justified. If you feel like, sheesh, that's kind of annoying, millions of dollars flowing to people who also make money off of memberships and YouTube ad revenue. So it's not that without tenant media, they couldn't do what they do. But a part of what they're supported by, it appears, allegedly, as is being exposed in this indictment of the 2 Russian individuals who were improperly trying to influence the election. There's some bad actors involved in supporting these people. And so if you want to support shows that aren't, it doesn't have to be me, but shows that aren't having foreign governments funneling money towards them. I say this in a pretty serious way. Again, it doesn't have to be me, but whichever shows you do like, do support them. And for me, it's by clicking the join button or even just subscribing, the easy, free way. But then more significantly, the join button, becoming a member, and you get extra content. We have a fun little members only community, but it makes a difference. And that's the only plug I'm going to do. Then you have the responses. In response to the indictment of the 2 Russians, Poole wrote on social media, should these allegations prove true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and are victims. I cannot speak for anyone else at the company as to what they do or to what they are instructed. And, this is dumb. Poole also said he had full editorial control of the show and its contents, which he said are often apolitical. This is why I tell you all my political views. And I make sure to tell you, I'm going to share my opinions with you. And I'm going to be clear about where I stand. Because people like to do this thing where they go, I'm sort of like not political. And I just sort of float above the partisan lines we draw. It's so arbitrary. And I'm a free thinker and I'm different and I'm independent. But then they just push MAGA stuff. Or you could presumably have someone does that and pushes left-wing ideas. Just be transparent. Stick to the facts. Present accurate facts, but then be transparent about how you feel about them and what your opinions are. Instead of this weird, I'm above it all, I don't actually engage in partisan politics in any way, but then happen to only do right-wing content. But often apolitical, he says. Benny Johnson, who's really, really scary in how detached from reality he is. He said a separate statement shared on social media that his company was pitched by a media startup a year ago to provide content as an independent contractor. He said his lawyers negotiated a standard arm's length deal that was later terminated. We are disturbed by the allegations in today's indictment, which make clear that myself and other influencers were victims in this alleged scheme. My lawyers will handle anyone who states or suggests otherwise. I say again, and I'm not seeing a response from Dave Rubin at this time, but I say again, by the way, you remember in the segment I say I don't normally call people grifters, but Dave Rubin seems like a grifter? Hello. I'm transparently telling you I think it's very plausible that they didn't know this connection. It was very abstracted. That would be dangerous for Russia to reveal what's going on here, because if it didn't go well, they could be exposed for it. I'm totally willing to accept that. That's not really the point, though. And don't call yourself victims. That's so dramatic. We were given money? And so, what's the argument? So we're really the victims because we didn't know the money was coming from Russia? All right. A very strange thing there. But again, I beg, how about you do a little introspection? Why would Russia want to get money to you? Why do they think you're a good vessel to divide Americans? For example, yes, we use often some YouTube-y titles, you could say. All right? I think you click on this video, you hear my message. We talk about how our ultimate goal in winning elections, for example, is uplifting everyone. I just, in a different segment, was talking about how just one incredible family and friend after another with a good heart who happens to be misled enough to vote for Trump. I think the message coming from this show, can't speak for others, is one that wouldn't be of interest to someone who wants to go and divide Americans, right? Not to toot my own horn. It's a little uncomfortable to say this about myself. But I'll cite someone else, friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, David Pakman, another example. He's not getting offers for money to flow to him for the purposes of explicitly dividing Americans, because the way that information is delivered on that show is not a way that's going to exacerbate tensions, I believe. Whereas these are. And so do the introspection. Why is this something that's being set up to get money to you and not others? Allegedly, if all these things turn out to be true, then you have this reporting.
Just 2 months before Election Day, the Department of Justice accused Russia of an elaborate, sophisticated propaganda campaign to sway voters. 2 Russian officials with state-controlled RT are charged as part of an alleged scheme to work with a Tennessee company to publish stories favorable to Russia, to splinter Americans and dampen support for Ukraine. Both officials remain at large overseas.
The American people were informed when a foreign power engages in political activities or seeks to influence public discourse.
The feds also seized 32 internet domains believed to be tools of Russia's disinformation campaign, directed by Vladimir Putin's administration, with a playbook to push polarizing issues, including inflation, job loss for white Americans, privileges for people of color, threats of crime from people of color, and to target an audience of lower and middle class white Americans as supporters of candidate A. Though the court filings don't explicitly identify candidate A, the Attorney General indicated Russia wanted to bolster support for Trump.
Russia's preferences have not changed from the preceding election.
The Department of Justice says Russia pushed out phony news reports to trick readers and viewers into thinking they were reading real articles from the Washington Post or Fox News, but they were not.
Show me your legal authority or get out.
The propagandists targeted social media influencers who have massive followings to spread this misinformation far and wide. Some articles and videos secured millions of views, including on YouTube.
Russia has used the past several years to...
This is crazy. Do you remember when I said... You remember when I said that, gosh, all these Biden allegations, I don't want to say this because it seems so libby, right? Of course a liberal would think that. But it seemed like a Russian misinformation operation, right? It felt off. And then Alexander Smirnov was indicted for just that, for fabricating these things to the FBI. And it was sort of, oh, all right, well, I guess the gut instinct was right. I remember seeing some of these videos from Tenet Media, and I can never say this on the show because I don't think people should just speculatively throw out things like that. You're probably being paid by Russia. That's a lot. And I had no evidence at the time of that. But it's weird how much this confirms my just gut belief about this, because it felt too good to be true in a sense for them. And gosh, I wish those influencers would do some introspection, but they're not. They're not, because the very thing that Russia's trying to stoke also serves social media algorithms. So being divisive, being polarizing, all those things also serves what social media unfortunately incentivizes, which is why the only people who can change that is us as consumers. We have to stop giving positive feedback, bolstering that type of incentive structure. But it's so crazy to see these people who, again, Tim Pool, for example, I'm sure, given how long he's been doing this and before Tenet Media was a thing, he could have a perfectly fine, flourishing business with his content regardless. It's just shocking how much this dishonest content we see from folks like that aligns with the interest of Russia. And then I'll say, as my closing, we covered that story about fake MAGA influencers. And I don't mean fake like this. I mean fake like just photos of European models were used in photographs for someone in the United States who was, and we haven't figured out who was behind that, but who was building up followings for, again, these European influencers using their likeness to then push pro-Trump stuff, and that was exposed. And my point there, and it stands here too, is just be mindful talk to real people. And don't let on the online portrayal of the world, because sometimes this is going on to make it seem like the way that it is the same as reality. And maybe we can address the divisions a little bit that way. Let me know what you thought in the comments. And if you want to click the join button below, like I said, you can do it. But you don't have to. Even just watching is greatly appreciated.